Philippines, January 6, 1995. When police responded to an apartment fire, they found a Toshiba laptop amid a batch of chemicals and bomb-making materials. An open file on the laptop revealed a plan to simultaneously bomb 12 U.S. airliners over the Pacific. The potential death toll, 4,000 passengers. Several other files used encryption software that scrambled the writings in secret code. The Philippine police decoded some of the files using a special computer program and uncovered a list of bomb-making recipes. All the evidence pointed to the most hunted terrorist in the world, Ramzi Youssef, wanted for his involvement in the World Trade Center bombing. Youssef's plots were stopped, and he was in U.S. custody within 6 weeks. It was a major victory for international law enforcement and revealed the importance of cryptology, the science of making and breaking secret codes. To trace the development of codes is to uncover the very fabric of civilization. Once a culture reaches a level of sophistication in literacy, science, and language, the demand for secret symbolic communication flourishes.
I think codes go back probably as far as there is language. People had something to keep secret. They needed to find some way to scramble it.
For centuries, codes have been controlled by governments, employed in war, applied in diplomacy, and used in espionage. But with modern technology, the use of codes by individuals has exploded, enriching cryptology and empowering citizens. A communications boom has heightened the need for codes to keep the information private on the internet, at ATMs, and in medical offices. Today's complex codes are the result of a historic seesaw battle between code makers and code breakers that has pushed the very boundaries of science. The earliest known code was an inscription carved into a rock by an Egyptian scribe in 1900 BC. It was an attempt to demonstrate wider knowledge by dressing up the writing. Ordinary hieroglyphics were replaced with unusual symbols, which told the story of the writer's master, Khnumhotep II. Another early code was used for secrecy. A tiny enciphered tablet found on the banks of the Tigris River, dating from 1500 BC, contained a hidden formula for glazing pottery. And the ancient Greeks created their own inventive coding methods.
One of the subordinates of a Persian monarch thought that it might be time to revolt. And he had an agent in the court of Darius the Great, and this agent sent a message to this man saying it's now time to revolt. He shaved the head of one of his slaves and tattooed on the head the word revolt, and waited for the hair to grow and sent the slave down to this man's palace. When the man got the slave, he shaved the head, saw the word revolt, and realized that this was the time, and he did revolt successfully.
In Sparta, a new instrument to encipher messages between legions was used. It was called a scytale.
A cloth was wrapped around a stick and a message written down the side. Wrapped around the stick, the message could be read. Unwrapped, it was scrambled. The message was sent from general to general. Unwrapped, the generals would have a stick of the appropriate length, could wrap the cloth around it, and read the message.
Every code had a key, a secret method of scrambling and unscrambling messages used by sender and receiver. Julius Caesar enciphered his military communications using a key that employed an alternative alphabet by moving each letter 3 spaces to the right. But with the collapse of the Roman Empire in 500 AD, European cryptology entered a dark age that would last for 1,000 years. But another civilization was rising in the East. By 900 AD, Arab society was one of the most literate cultures in the world, and the study of codes flourished. The Arabs were the first to record the methods of transposition, the scrambling of letters, as well as substitution, the replacement of letters with numbers and symbols. They were the first to outline specific techniques of code breaking that involved mathematical or frequency analysis.
The Arabs were very interested in letter studies, and they counted the number of times a character such as Aleph appeared in the Quran, and they discovered which letters began words frequently. They used this information, a statistical source, to learn how to break codes. The most frequent coded letter represents the most frequent plain text letter, and that's how you begin to solve a code. And they were the first to do this.
With the Renaissance, cryptology had a rebirth in Europe. In 1466, an Italian architect, Leone Alberti, developed the greatest cryptologic invention in 1,000 years at the urging of the Vatican. It was a system of rotating cipher disks with 2 rings of letters and several numbers. By scrambling so many letters randomly, it was the first to challenge the Arab code-breaking method of frequency analysis.
Previous systems just replaced A with D, only one at a time. The Alberti cipher disk used a disk in which these letter combinations could be changed from time to time, and as a consequence, A would be represented not by only one letter, but by many letters. This was called polyalphabetic, many alphabet substitution, and it was the basis for many modern cipher systems.
A French diplomat, Blaise de Vigenère, improved the Alberti system in 1586 by creating a grid of 26 cipher alphabets, each shifted 1 over from the last. By use of a key word, encoding and decoding communications using Vigenère's square could be calculated on a sheet of paper instead of having to carry a disk. Unfortunately, Mary, Queen of Scots, did not employ this new development. Beginning in 1568, Mary was imprisoned by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England. In 1586, a group of Catholics sought to rescue Mary and put her on England's throne after assassinating Elizabeth. Her rescuers communicated with Mary through secret coded letters.
Her great mistake was in thinking that her cipher system was secure. It was actually being read by Queen Elizabeth's code breakers, and everything about the plot was known. And when it reached a certain critical point, Queen Elizabeth called a halt to it and sentenced Mary, Queen of Scots, to death.
By the 1700s, each European power had its own black chamber, a nerve center for deciphering messages and gathering intelligence. But the real revolution in cryptology was just ahead.
Telegraph, for the first time, made it possible to send messages quickly over long distances. In fact, it made the United States a continental power by increasing its communications power. It also raised the necessity for cryptology.
In 1844, Samuel Morse invented Morse code, a series of electrical dots and dashes to communicate over the telegraph. Because the code was public and messages could be easily intercepted, the need for new secret codes became acute. But the telegraph paled in comparison to the communication industry's next scientific development, one that revolutionized codes and was used with murderous impact in the 20th century. At the dawn of the 20th century, an Italian physicist, Guglielmo Marconi, changed the world of codes forever. Marconi's invention harnessed radio waves as a new method of communication. The result was an instantaneous transmission of messages across long distances.
The invention of the radio was the most important single event in the history of codes and ciphers. Radio had the great effect of facilitating communications. You don't have to lay wire or anything like that. You can just go out with a radio post and communicate. But it has the great disadvantage of turning over to the enemy every message that you send. So this means you have to put into code every message that you send, so it stimulated enormously the great growth of codes and ciphers.
The ramifications of this new invention were not lost upon the generals. Radio allowed quick communication with field divisions and a more rapid, mobile form of warfare. Radio messages were enciphered and sent in Morse code across the airwaves. But radio transmission revealed every cryptogram it conveyed. It furnished a constant and massive stream of intercepts to the enemy. With the outbreak of World War I, the need for new codes and code breakers sharply escalated. A global battle of secret communications had begun. On August 5, 1914, British divers from the ship Telconia severed German cable lines in the North Atlantic.
It appears their idea was simply to make things more difficult for the Germans, but it had the payoff of forcing a great deal of traffic that would have gone by cable onto radio. And so it resulted in really a flood of intercepts coming in that otherwise wouldn't have been available.
Once intercepted, messages were sent to Room 40, the cryptanalysis section of the British Admiralty.
Room 40 might be the prototype of modern cryptanalytic organizations. They recruited mathematicians, linguists, chess masters, anybody who was good at puzzle solving.
In September 1914, Britain received one of the greatest gifts in the history of cryptology. Her allies, the Russians, captured the German cruiser Magdeburg in the Baltic and a book of Germany's main naval code. They promptly turned the code book over to Room 40, allowing Britain to break German naval messages and bottle up Germany's battleships for the duration of the war. Code breaking had transformed modern combat.
Being able to read the German naval signals often almost instantaneously was something that simply hadn't happened before in warfare.
On the Eastern Front, cryptography, or lack of it, led to one of the most critical battles in World War I. In late August 1914, the Russians sent 2 armies into East Prussia in a pinchers movement to trap the Germans near the village of Tannenberg. The Germans were outmanned, but had the advantage of listening in on Russian radio communications. Due to the Russians' rudimentary and disorganized coding system, intercepts told the Germans that the Russian Southern Army was moving faster than its northern force. The Germans wheeled and destroyed the Russian Southern Army, capturing 100,000 prisoners, with an estimated 30,000 dead or missing.
This was the first great defeat of the Russians in the war, and it started them on their long slide into ruin and revolution. The Russians did not, at World War I, have a good cipher system, and in part they lost the war because of it.
But the greatest code-breaking event in the history of cryptology began on January 17, 1917. The British intercepted a telegram that was encrypted with the highest German diplomatic code, 0075. It was a mind-numbing system of 10,000 words and phrases attached to 1,000 numerical code groups. The secret message was from the German Foreign Minister, Arthur Zimmerman, to his ambassador in Washington, Johann von Bernstorff, for relay to Germany's ambassador to Mexico, Heinrich von Eckhardt. The telegram would be deciphered there and sent to Mexico's president, Venustiano Carranza.
It was sent from Berlin to Washington, encrypted on the American undersea telegraph cable. The British intercepted it there, recognized its importance. It was in a new diplomatic system which the British had not yet broken.
After receiving the message in the new 0075 code, von Bernstorff's office in Washington then made a fatal mistake.
In Washington, they took this telegram out of the new diplomatic code book, re-encrypted it in the old diplomatic code book, and sent it to Mexico City on the telegraph.
But the British had already broken the old code.
The British intercepted that version as well, had versions to compare. Perhaps the silliest, most tragic error that a cryptographer can make.
British cryptanalysts began to decipher the message in the old code in painstaking chunks, constructing patterns using pencil and paper. Within days, they had it. As the meaning of Zimmerman's secret message began to emerge, the import was stunning. Despite the sinking of the American ocean liner Lusitania by the Germans in 1915, America maintained its neutrality with the promise of German restrictions on its U-boats. The Zimmerman telegram outlined Germany's intent to resume unrestricted submarine warfare on February 1st, 1917, as a means to strangle Britain. To keep America at bay, Zimmerman proposed that Mexico invade the United States and reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Germany also asked Mexico to persuade Japan to attack America. The actions would be backed with German military and financial aid. The British Admiralty was desperate to get the deciphered message to the Americans without alerting the Germans that their code had been broken. A British agent was able to infiltrate the Mexican telegraph office and retrieve a deciphered copy of the message to Mexico's president. Once they had their cover of a supposed leak in Mexico, the British approached the Americans and revealed the telegram.
The whole country blew up. Everybody was incensed. Formerly, only the East Coast was concerned. Now, suddenly, the whole Midwest was worried about Mexico. And 6 weeks after this message was deciphered, the United States declared war on Germany. So it was probably the most significant event in code-breaking history and certainly in intelligence history.
What the Zimmerman telegram did was convince the entire country that Germany was a national enemy. And a few months later, when Woodrow Wilson asked for a declaration of war, he had a united and angry country behind him, ready to go to war against the Germans.
A single breakthrough by the cryptanalysts in Room 40 had succeeded where 3 years of intensive diplomacy had failed. Code-breaking would play an even greater role in cryptology's golden age, World War II.